Let me do a little bit of review. All right, I'm glad I put a couple slides up there for just some review purposes because last week your textbook devotes like 3 paragraphs really, 5 paragraphs really, and an extra little couple of infographics about a really awful period in American history where we Americans interned Japanese Americans. Many of those Japanese Americans were not Japanese immigrants, they were actually second generation, so they were born here. So by today's laws and legalities, they were American citizens. Yet they were kicked out of their homes and out of their businesses, and they were placed in camps.
Sorry about that.
Now it's important to remember that these camps, they weren't work camps, they weren't concentration camps, they weren't death camps. However, they were camps, and these people were isolated and they were forced off of their property, out of their businesses. And the compensation they receive, as we take a look closer at this over the next 2 days, you'll see, is really crappy. It's a really awful time in American history. About 110,000 Americans were told, you're a risk. Get out of your house. Your business is now owned by somebody else. Your house is now owned by somebody else. And you are going to a camp, usually in the middle of the desert, in a cold, nasty environment. And we'll take a look at some of that today and tomorrow. So we're looking at this issue of why were Japanese Americans interned during World War II, all right? So take a look at the blue sheet I gave you guys, and it gives you an idea of where we're going with this, okay? We're going to be reading a couple of documents. We have 4 documents to read. We'll probably get to 1 or 2 of them today, and we'll do the other 2 or 3 tomorrow. We're also going to watch a newsreel that's about 10 minutes long. It's a PSA. Does anybody know what a PSA is?
Public service announcement.
Thank you. It's a public service announcement. So this is a public service announcement newsreel that was created in 1942 addressing to the American people, hey, people are being moved out of their homes and this is why we're doing it, all right? At face value, it looks really, really bad, but we've got to dig a little deep into the history to figure out how bad or if it's that bad. So we're going to take a look at that little 10-minute snippet, but I want to just kind of review some of the textbook things that will refresh your mind what we looked at last week. So our textbook defines internment as the temporary imprisonment of members of a specific group. Take a look at that word, imprisonment. There's not really an easy way to kind of sugarcoat Japanese internment. The majority of these people were American citizens, or they were at least born in America, and they were put into an imprisonment camp, all right? The earliest orders, we're going to take a look at some of them today, the earliest orders were simply that Japanese Americans must leave designated military zones. So anything near like a Navy base on the coast, anything near a military base, if you had a house that was near or on a military base and you were an Asian American, specifically a Japanese American, you were told to get the hell out. That's messed up. Yeah, it's messed up. Yeah, it's messed up. And we'll see how messed up it was. The interior states, so check, this is how bad it really was. So imagine you're a Japanese American, you know, you've been living here, your parents immigrated here, you were born here, you got a business here, you're living in Oceanside, whatever. And you're told, hey, that's too close to the Marine Corps base, you got to move. What? Go to Arizona. What does Arizona say? We don't want you. Don't come here. All right? So the Japanese Americans must leave these designated zones, usually coastal zones near bases. And the interior states leaders said, we don't want you coming here. The Arizona governor was on record as saying, don't let those dirty Japanese near my state. I'm dead serious. I'm dead serious. This is the kind of thing these people had to tolerate in America, you know, land of the free, home of the brave, all that junk. Okay, so later on, both Japanese immigrants, they were called Issei, and native-born Americans of Japanese descent were called Nisei. They were like second generation, or at least they were born here. In some cases, they were even third generation who were born here. They were relocated and isolated in camps. So all a bunch of Japanese Americans in a camp, fences all around, stay there. The majority remained in those camps for the duration of the war, and many of them, as we'll find out later on, which is probably the worst part of this, after it was all over, they said, hey, you know, sorry, you can go back to your way of life. They went home, and people owned their home, and their businesses were gone. They did while they were there. Yeah, they did. Yeah, yeah, they did while they were there. All right. So here's a couple of little kind of background things. This is actually one of the orders. These were posted up all over towns, like, hey, you live too close to a military base, you got to go. Later on, eventually, the executive order was issued, and it was like, dude, everybody gone. Go. You're going to camps. There were 10 total camps, 2 in California, Manzanar and Tule Lake. But there were several more. There's a couple in Arizona, one in Utah, even some way over here in Arkansas. All right, and so basically anybody who is in these areas, see this military area, this exclusion zone, it's kind of all this tan area. There's lots of military bases along the coast. Well, we're going to examine why. I don't want to kind of spill the whole story. I want you to examine the primary resources we have, and I want you to think of why. Because there's a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of different reasons proposed as to why America did this. And there's several sides to the story. Some of them don't have much of a leg to stand on. All right? Okay, so a couple more pictures real quick. This is kind of what it looked like. This was a bachelor barracks. So this might have been a dude who owned a business, might have had a home, I don't know. But here he is now living here for 3 to 4 years. This is a bachelor barracks. I don't remember where this one was located. I think Manzanar, but I'm not 100% positive.
Do you people still alive from when they had to? Like,
They are.
World War II?
They are, and they're very mad.
I would be mad too.
Yeah. Like kids remember this really well. You know, little kids who were there, they remember this really well. They remember,
Yeah.
I don't want to share the whole story. Tomorrow I'll share the rest of the story, the other information I have. This is just, these are people forming, going to get lunch, actually. They were going to eat. But look at like the gates and the fences and all the stuff behind them. All right, so to think that this wasn't like a forced camp thing, it really was.
Oh, at least they were feeding them though.
So they were feeding them.
Probably a little portion.
They were providing education. We'll talk about those a little more tomorrow.
It's irritating.
I'll have sushi.
I hate being American.
Okay, so today let's take a look at the timeline real quick. All right, let's look at the timeline. You should have a timeline on your desk. Look around for a white sheet of paper. If you don't already have one, grab one. Okay, so I just want to hit some of the greatest hits from the timeline. Okay, so the very first one, it says 1891 Japanese immigrants arrived. So that's when the majority of Japanese immigrants start coming to America. And like most immigrants who come to America, they come for economic opportunities. They come for work. Okay, 1906, about 15 years later, the San Francisco Board of Education passed a resolution saying to segregate schools. White-only school, Asian-only school. All right. 1913, just a few years later, just prior to World War I, if you're kind of keeping the timeline in your history in your brain, California passes the Alien Land Law forbidding aliens from owning land. So basically, if you were an immigrant from another country, you couldn't own land. 1924, so now we're after World War I, Congress passes the Immigration Act of 1924, which it ceased all Japanese immigration to America. All right. 1924, I thought we were mad at Japan in 1941. Keep that in the back of your brain. This is 1924. All right. November 1941, the Munson Report is released, and we're going to take a look at that today. December 7th, 1941. That is when Pearl Harbor was bombed. So all this stuff is going on prior to Pearl Harbor, ladies and gents. Make sure you take a note of that. February 19th, 1942, Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066. That is when all Japanese people were forced to leave those areas, and they went to camps. All right. January 1943, War Department formed a segregated Japanese American soldiers unit. January 1944, the War Department drafted Japanese Americans, including those that were incarcerated in the camp. So not only did they lock them up in a camp, then they showed up and said, "Hey, if you're between 18 and 26, you got to come with us. You're getting drafted." I think it was 21 to 28 at the time. Yeah. December 1944, this is the Korematsu versus the United States case. We'll take a look at that tomorrow. A guy said, "This is BS. There's no way I'm doing this. I'm an American. I own a business. I'm not going to that camp." And he sued the country, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at that. March 20th, 1946, the last war relocation facility in Tule Lake, which is in California, it closed. So it was until March 20th, 1946. Is somebody listening to music over here? Because I can hear it. It's driving me insane. 1980, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians was established. So 1980, here we are almost 35 years later. The government says, "Hey, we need to discuss internment." All right. 1983, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians issues a report called Personal Justice Denied. We'll read that tomorrow. And then on August 10th, 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed H.R. 442 into law. It basically said, "Hey, we're really sorry. That was really awful that we wrongfully imprisoned 110,000 Japanese Americans. and we're gonna pay you all 20 grand each.
I mean,
20 grand.
you think, well, that's not good. At least they got
Okay.
something.
Let me make sure I got volume, you guys, and I'm going to play this newsreel. It's about 9.5 or 10 minutes long. As we're watching it, you guys, take a look at your blue sheet because these are the questions we have to answer about it. Look on the slide real quick. They're also on your blue sheet. We're looking for the date. We're looking for reasons that the newsreel suggests, the reasons for internment. And then we're looking for the evidence the newsreel provides. Okay? So let's take a look at this. Let me make sure I got volume.